during the 1960s in particular. And one of the things that we had a consensus on at that time was that there was a pressing need for us to bring back the spirit that permeated our people and our community during the 1960s. If you recall, the 1960s was a time when black was beautiful. When we talked about, without shame or embarrassment, black power. When our children sang songs such as how wonderful it was to be young, gifted, and black. We were unashamed and unapologetic during the 1960s about our racial heritage. We were proud of being people of African descent. And we noted that there has been a remarkable reversal of those sorts of contributory factors that led to our being so proud of ourselves and of one another, and the way that we got along and called each other brother and sister, and meant it when we said it, talked about loving each other. We talked about the importance of elevating our women and holding them in the highest of esteem. We talked about modeling the proper behavior for our children. And we recognized on that day, in December 9th of 2006, the urgency of us doing something to bring back that spirit. And thus was born the idea of the movement to bring back black. We have met in Atlanta on 2 occasions, and we had our annual convention to give birth to the organization that we decided had to come out of or grow out of this movement. The movement is the movement to bring back black, but the movement is a movement. It's not an organization. But one of the primary responsibilities of the movement was to give birth to an organization so that we would have the structural capacity to move in the direction programmatically and systematically that we need to move in order to have a fighting chance of realistically addressing the needs and the concerns of people of African descent, not only in America, though primarily in America, but throughout the African diaspora, including, of course, those brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa itself. So we gave birth to the Nationalist Black Leadership Coalition on October 13th of 2007. And as we speak, we are actively engaged in the process of recruiting members for that organization and establishing chapters of that organization in areas around the country, cities and smaller communities, wherever there is a concentration of people of African descent. The problems that our people have in this country is that we are not clear on what it is that we are talking about when we talk about things. We tend to be an expressive people. We always talk about how emotional black people are. So we are emotional and we are very expressive, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, we should not be emotional or expressive to the exclusion of being practical and thinking and acting with our heads and not always leading with our hearts. So one of the things that we need to do is to understand something that we came to realize sort of abruptly, and to our dismay coming out of the 1960s, we realized that everything black wasn't black. And you've heard the saying, and I'm sure you've said it at one time or another, if not many times, everything black ain't black. So in the 60s, we just accepted that everything black was black, that every black person had a love for black people and would do anything and everything in their power to assist and aid black people in a forward and upward trajectory. Well, we discovered to our dismay as we moved past the 60s and into the 70s, with a lot of help from those who are not our friends, I should add, that everything and everyone black wasn't really black, not in the sense of what we were talking about when we talked about blackness. They may have been black of skin or members of the black race, as it were, but their hearts and minds were not attuned to what was in the best interest of black people. And those people tended to function internally to the detriment of the group. So it was difficult for us to effectively face and defeat our external enemies because we had so many internal operatives whose interest was to look out for the interests of the enemy without, if you will. So we began to back up a little bit and take stock of the situation and realize that we could not draw everybody black to our breast just because they happened to be black, that we had to have some other way of assessing people, if not judging them, as to where they actually stood with respect to an agenda of benefit to the advancement of people of African descent. One of the critical ways that you can look at people in order to make that assessment or to begin the process of making that assessment is to understand what their ideological or philosophical orientation is. And one of the things that is very obvious to those of us who take this to heart is that there are essentially two types of ideological / philosophical leanings extant in America, period, not just amongst black folk. We associate that usually with the white community and generally speaking in the arena of partisan electoral politics. We know, for example, those of us who pay attention, that there are essentially two philosophical concepts that give rise to political activity in America, two opposing or contrasting at least points of view as to how to take care of moving the white folks' agenda. I think I need to make it very clear that all white people believe in the supremacy of white folk. They have different views and opinions, though, of how best and most effectively to keep white folks on top and keep everybody else in their place relative to white people. So one of the schools of thought there would be the so-called conservative school of thought. These are the people who are very closely related to or associated with what we generally would refer to white supremacists and to racists in particular. Conservatives and racists are essentially the same thing. So the conservative part of the white political paradigm or philosophical or ideological paradigm is a very harsh kind of a position relative to people who are not themselves white, and even harsh to a certain extent towards white people who are not conservative. So white conservatives don't like black folks, don't like Jews, don't like Hispanics, don't like anything that is not white. At the same time, they also don't like white people who don't hate black people and Jews and other people who are not white. So they're on the opposite side of everybody. The opposing group amongst white people to the conservatives are what used to be referred to as liberals.